Because the main concern for Muslims in terms of how liberalism affects their worldview and how it can produce or pronounce or compound shubuhat or doubts that they may have about the religion, especially in the field of morality, of what is referred to as akhlaqiyat, is that when someone is conditioned into the liberal philosophical paradigm and then they approach the Quran, they may have doubts in Islam because when they were younger, on key issues to do with tolerance and allowances and disallowances, there was a certain philosophy that they had been drip fed without knowing, which is this liberal, we call meta ethic. It's the dominant ethic in the West. And so it creates shubuhat, just as when someone is, without knowing, immersed in a feminist ideology, or more particularly the second wave feminist ideology, and then they approach a surah of the Quran like Surah An-Nisa, or they approach other parts of the Quran or ahadith or ahkam, which differentiate roles between men and women, it immediately causes doubts for people like this that have been conditioned into this paradigm. And these doubts can sometimes be very crippling, and sometimes can be debilitating, and sometimes can even stop one from having yaqeen or certainty about the religion of Islam. And these doubts would not have existed 100 years ago. So in the sense that because these ideologies, many of them have gone through phases, like in the case of liberalism, it's obviously there since the 16th century, but its most modern manifestations kind of crystallized in the Victorian era, when you had John Stuart Mill. He's a particular philosopher who wrote about it extensively. And so the harm principle, which is the golden principle of you are free to do whatever you want to do so long as you don't harm anybody else, this became the major way of reasoning ethically. And so with this, obviously, there is allowance in terms of homosexuality, in terms of the LGBTQ movement, in terms of religious freedoms, all of those kinds of things, many of which, not all of which, but many of which, there is a tension with Islamic principles. And so this is where the shubuhat come in, this is where doubts come in for somebody who is sincerely trying to connect themselves with their Lord. This is the case also, as I've mentioned or alluded to, with feminism. So after the 60s, where serious questions were asked by white women, particularly in the West, and usually in the United States, but also in other spheres, other places, about equal pay, about domestic chores, about the institution of marriage, and about motherhood. These questions now would act like an ethic. And so when somebody who has been conditioned because they have grown up in the West, in Germany, in Belgium, in Holland, in the UK, in the US, or indeed even in the Middle East itself, where we think that we have Islamic countries, but many of them have been influenced by Western colonialism, ideological colonialism, through the media, through the education system, through direct colonialization. I mean, most of the countries in the Middle East were colonized by liberal countries. I mean, don't forget the Napoleon Wars, the Napoleonic Wars that took place in the 18th century. This was a mission to try and spread liberalism by the sword, if you like. Of course, Napoleon went into Egypt and many different countries, but if you look at the details of what happened when he went into Egypt, you'll see that he didn't just direct his attention to military encroachment. He wanted to take over the education system. He wanted to change people's minds. So this process of indoctrination and ideological hegemony has been going over for almost 150 to 200 years, even in the Middle East. So it's very strong. It's so strong that you may grow up thinking that this is right and this is wrong, and you really have a fixed morality because of what you were taught in school, of what you hear in the news, of what you read in newspapers, or wherever it may be. This culminates. We cannot pretend that it doesn't have an impact on us. And it seems so intuitive. A lot of these ethics seem so intuitive. You feel like this is the way it should be. And imagine now we have tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of Muslims or tens of millions in Europe and tens of millions in the West. They're all going through this process. So when they're growing up now, they were told by their teachers, they were told by even watching films and news programs, whatever it is, you know, this is morality. Anta hur ma la tadur, or you are free to do whatever you like so long as you don't harm anybody else. And if you get in the way of that, you are unethical. So the problem now, or the issue, is deconstructing, or the mission, objective is to deconstruct this.